Yeah, hi folks. Now, as I've said before, we're now witnessing a communist takeover of New Zealand, led by Comrade Ardern, Andrew Little, Willie Jackson, Ngārewa Mahuta, and other HePuaPua separatists like Matthew Tukaki, Debbie Ngarewa-Packer, and Rawiri Waititi, etc. And the forced Three Waters takeover of our water and council property is a classic example of communism. And if they can take over and control council property, they can take over and control your property. Now have a listen to Benjamin Dunbar Smith. And folks, I apologise for some of the poor quality audio in this video.
But as Peter said, the liars, that they still say, oh no, we're not actually going to, you're still going to own it.
You're still going to own it.
But you can't have control of it anymore.
But you can't have control of it anymore.
And that comes down to private property.
And that comes down to private property. So if they can do that to councils, they can do it to you.
If you own something, the whole principle of Western law is that you own your property, you have the right to defend it, and you can sell it when you want. And you can control what happens on that. The control is being taken away, and then nominally you'll be left with asset. So the group I'm working with is looking at a legal challenge to this now.
Anyway, I'll just go back a bit.
Okay, so my name is Benjamin Dunbar Smith. I'm from the Coromandel, and I've been campaigning up there with Scott Simpson, opposing the Three Waters proposal. And I have a PowerPoint here which basically goes through very similar issues to what Peter's done, and what a fantastic speech. One of the issues we now have is, what do you do? And I think Peter's pointed out, if your Western Bay Council has had its amendments changed by the Chief Executive, that should not be happening. And one thing you can do is, everyone has a right to attend the council for a public meeting section for 5 minutes each, speaking at the beginning of each council meeting. So you should turn up. You should nominate some people to go there.
We've been doing that.
Yeah?
We've done it twice.
I know, but keep on doing it, because
I told them to resign last time.
Good. Well, it sounds like you should nominate this lady to keep going back. But she needs a whole lot of people in the room with her. Yeah. So, the government's new form. So, again, what Peter said, water is vital to life. You can live for 2 months without food, you can last 3 days without water. But that's why the major corporates around the world want to own. It's the new gold. Precisely. Well, we more new corporates, but we're facing big government here. We're the little person being squeezed. We're the 67 councils that have owned these assets, and we have a big government agenda taking over. It centralises power to an unelected board, reduces the power that we have here, reduces the strength of local councils, because when you take away 30% of the income from local councils, when you take away the water, you also take away their ability to borrow. It diminishes councils. So we even have less say in the future. And it increases the risk of future privatisation. I'll come to that in a minute.
Now this is the interesting bit.
Now this is something from Thames, and it's a plaque from 1923 where the ratepayers, mind you, not taxpayers, but the ratepayers, actually paid £200,000 for building the water and electricity and sewerage systems. So £200,000 in 1923 was a lot of money. What the government is doing is taking away...
What the government is doing is taking away...
everything our fathers and their fathers...
Everything our fathers and their fathers...
and families built.
And families built. It's downright theft. And this is happening right across New Zealand. Anyway, now to News Hub.
It's called Three Waters, and the government's pushing it through come hell or high water. The plan takes power off councils to manage drinking water, wastewater and stormwater. Being a part of it was originally voluntary but is now compulsory and extremely tricky for future governments to unpick. 4 publicly owned entities will be created to ensure access to water infrastructure without ballooning costs. The government says after 30 years, households will save annually between $1,080 in Christchurch and $7,800 in Kaipara.
Yeah, so why after 30 years? Private businesses never say wait for 30 years.
Year. The vast majority of councils are fuming and opposition parties are promising to kill the reforms if given a chance. Political reporter Amelia Wade has more on this water fight.
From the far north,
a mistake,
to Auckland,
at this point are unacceptable,
to Hastings,
we are devastated.
Porirua is on board.
It's positive.
Yeah, because everybody else is going to pay for you.
Christchurch is gutted.
I was disappointed.
This is how mayors across the Motu have reacted to the government forcing Three Waters reform on them. But according to the minister,
they may not be popular, but they are necessary.
After 8 weeks of consulting on the plan to amalgamate council-owned water infrastructure into 4 regional bodies.
Imagine Aotearoa without good water. That'd be rude as, eh?
The government has decided to force councils to hand over their assets.
The case for change was compelling. The more we found out, the more we realised that something had to change.
It says the plan will come into effect by 2024 and over the next 30 years create up to 9,000 new jobs.
So how can you create up to 9,000 new jobs and be cheaper?
Boost the economy by up to $23 billion and save households thousands in water bills. But iwi are concerned about the flow-on effects for treaty settlements.
We're not convinced that a catch-all phrase that treaty settlements will not be undermined actually goes far enough to protect the very specific and sophisticated redress mechanisms that we've got in place.
But most mayors hate that it's being forced on them.
We agree that there's a problem. We're not opposed to reform. We just think the model is wrong.
What we don't want is need it to be mandated. That's an insult to us.
The minister firing back.
There's an element of self-interest in many of the comments coming from councillors.
Self-interest, she says. That is so typical of the left. They always accuse others of what they're doing themselves.
Joining me is Dr. Muriel Newman, a former business representative, a former politician, right of centre, now head of the think tank, the New Zealand Centre for Political Research. Dr. Newman, thank you so much for your time. Can you tell us, please, about this plan? Because the amazing thing to me is that there has been so little debate in New Zealand about what seems to me a very clear plan for apartheid in your country.
Well, you're right, Andrew. It was introduced under the United Nations Declaration of Indigenous Peoples. So it was a plan to implement that international agenda, if you like. And what came out of it was, in fact, HePuaPua, which is a plan for tribal control by 2040.
And this is Mahuta's self-interest she never mentions. And Three Waters is part of it.
Which is the anniversary, the 200-year anniversary of the treaty, signing of the Treaty of Waitangi. And that report was produced in 2019, but the government kept it secret, even from their coalition partner, New Zealand First, for the whole of 2020. And then the election came along and they kept it secret then. And now that they have total power, total control, they are implementing it at speed. And it is extremely frightening because most Kiwis have no idea what's going on. They see changes happening every day and wonder what on earth is driving it. And unfortunately, we're in a situation where the government has spent $55 million on a public interest broadcasting fund, which is something that the media can apply for to get grants. And one of the conditions of doing that is that they have to, if you like, speak out in favour of this treaty partnership agenda, which is the reason that the Maori sovereignty movement is giving for wanting to take 50% of control of New Zealand.
Wow, you've raised so many things I need to flesh out here that really disturb me. First of all, now, correct me, because I'm not from New Zealand and I didn't sit, learning New Zealand history at school, but you say this is to mark the anniversary of the Treaty of Waitangi. As I understand it, the Treaty of Waitangi was Maori tribes who had been decimating each other in war, coming together to say to the British, we accept British sovereignty, which ultimately then transforms New Zealand sovereignty under the British Crown. We accept British sovereignty, and now to mark the anniversary, you're going to undo all that by having 50-50 after all. I mean, this doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't make sense for Kiwis either. The reality is that the treaty brought equality, equal rights for all New Zealanders, and that is the way this country has developed. There's been a strong movement, I guess, from sovereignty activists that sort of arose in the 80s. But somehow over recent years, they've managed to march into many institutions in New Zealand and take over positions of some power. They've marched now into government. And as I said, that because the Labour Party doesn't need a coalition partner anymore under our MMP electoral system, it means that the Maori caucus actually have a lot of control over cabinet. And we're quite afraid, really, that they are being given their head. They're not being reined in by Jacinda Ardern. And so we've got this headlong rush to Maori control. You mentioned the Maori health system or the Maori Health Authority, which will end up with the right of veto over the whole health system. We've got, at the moment, we're fighting a battle against Three Waters.
Here's the Three Waters bit.
Where the government's got this plan to centralise control of all water services, that's wastewater, stormwater and freshwater in New Zealand, take it away from councils and centralise it in 4 authorities, and they'll be half controlled by local iwi.
Half controlled by local iwi.
And of course, that'll give them essentially the right of veto over water in New Zealand. And all this is going on without an open debate. It's going on secretly.
It's not secret anymore, that's for sure.
And then specifically on the matter of water, HePuaPua states.
HePuaPua states.
Increased Māori rangatiratanga will require considerable resourcing and capacity building. If Māori are to exercise governance power, there needs to be support for this, and it may take time. Tikanga Māori will evolve and develop to greater application in the modern world, but it will also require support. The Crown's main contribution to capacity building will be in resourcing. There are multiple streams from which financial contributions might be sourced, including, for example, levies on resource use, where Māori have a clear interest, if not a strong claim to ownership, such as water. So could that be any clearer?
No.
The HePuaPua report suggests, in the kindest and most gentle way, that the Crown should resource Māori and iwi capacity building towards so-called self-determination by putting a levy on water use, because Māori have a strong claim to ownership of water. The concept of Māori ownership of water it must be challenged and challenged strenuously. Water is a naturally occurring phenomenon. It was falling from the skies for thousands, if not millions of years over these lands before the arrivals of the first peoples. And the quotes of John Key, nobody owns the water. It still falls from the sky to the tune of 600 billion cubic metres every year in this country. Our biggest challenge, frankly, in New Zealand should be to capture and reticulate that wonderful natural resource all over New Zealand for the benefit of us all, not one particular ethnicity. That learned judges of the nation's courts could even contemplate a concept such as ownership of fresh water is beyond me. Yes, I can understand the land under lakes, the land under rivers can be managed by private and often iwi interests. But the concept of actual water ownership is just absolutely illogical. How can a litre of water in Lake Taupo today
How can a litre of water in Lake Taupo today
be owned by anyone when that same
be owned by anyone when the same litre
is passing by Hamilton tomorrow
is passing by Hamilton tomorrow
and is in the Tasman Sea the day after?
and is in the Tasman Sea the day after? Exactly. It's moving. No one owns it.
See what I mean? Water is like the air that we breathe. It is never settled in one place. Therefore, how can it be owned?
Exactly.
Doubling down.
Any concern coming from councils that this is a confiscation of assets is misplaced. They are wrong. That is not happening.
But that's not what the opposition is saying.
State-sponsored theft.
This is undermining democracy. It is ripping assets off councils.
But despite the flood of criticism, the government's sailing full steam ahead.
Anyway, today I'll finish with this photo from Tararua Council. Keep the dirty commies out of our clean water. Well said, folks.